Good afternoon also from my side. We are continuing the conference and we are coming to the second part of today's program. Under the title Artistic Interventions in Collections, the artists Tania Bruguera and Florian Pumho, as well as the director of Museum Abteiberg in Nchengladbach, Susanne Titz, will present and discuss possibilities and forms to artistically refer to collections and to institutional structures, to work with them, to question them, and maybe also to transform them. The critique of institutions, of art institutions, of their power structures and of their mechanisms of exclusion, which has been expressed since years and decades, Sabet already mentioned this in her introduction, is currently accompanied by a very strong revision of the canonical mechanisms of evaluation and of judgment. In this context, artistic work with collections and with institutional structures is gaining enormous importance. Artists are working with historical materials which were not represented in the collection so far. Artists are creating new contexts and new forms of presentation. How they do this and how they use the institutional framework for their own artistic purposes and also political purposes, we will hear in a second. A brief remark on the practical procedure. Also in this second part of the conference, we will at first hear the three presentations. If urgent questions are coming up after each presentation, they are, of course, welcome to be asked. Otherwise, I would suggest that audience questions for the speakers will be answered in a joint discussion session after the three presentations. That's the administrational part. Now, I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Florian Pumho. Florian Pumho lives and works in Munich and in Vienna. He studied here in Vienna at the Hochschule für angewandte Kunst, the University of Applied Arts. Solo exhibitions of his work have been staged at Kunsthaus Bregenz, here at Mumok, at the Kunstverein für die Rheinlande and Westfalen, among many other places. His work has been featured in Documenta, in the Sao Paulo Biennial, the Venice Biennial, the Manifesta, Yokohama Triennial, and in many other group shows. Florian Pumho's work is based on historical references that make use of apparently abstract vocabulary of forms. His paintings, films, and installations, as well as his photographs, repeatedly refer to a historical phenomena at the margins of modern art. 17th century kimono design, avant-garde typography, World War I, military uniform patterns, Latin American textiles, or early dance notations. Through the unsystematic and subjective selection, reduction, rearrangement, or reproduction of his source materials, he creates works that are at once abstract and semiotically motivated. Florian Pumho understands the format of the exhibition as a central artistic medium. Quote, "My medium is the physical and historical space that I create using painting, architecture, film, or photography." As mentioned before, he had a solo show here at Mumok, and I had the pleasure to be the curator for him here. He presented his individual work in the solo presentation, but parallel to this, he conceived a new presentation of the Mumok collection with the title Abstract Space. Well, it's your turn, Florian. We are very happy that you're here. Thank you, and we are curious.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Sabet and Matthias, for the preparation and the introduction. Yeah, maybe I want to pick up a few things ahead, because Sabet showed us these beautiful examples of interventions earlier today. Hake, Wilson, we saw the Gorilla Girls in Max Holland's presentation yesterday. And of course, all of these are wonderful examples of interventions. But the question came up, can an artist be invited to do an intervention? Is it still an intervention? And in my presentation, I will focus on two things. The exhibition Abstrakter Raum, a collaboration with Matthias here in the museum, and the work of Paul Bonnet, French relieur artist, that might be a bit unexpected or even arbitrary in this context, but what came up for me this morning was the question, like, we heard so much about narratives and about works that speak, yeah, works that talk, and storytelling even, and what happens if the artwork, as Agnes Martin would put it, does not illustrate ideas? What if it refuses that? And Paul Bonnet's work might be an example that these works are even something in the space of illustrations, or they orchestrate texts in a way, but I don't think they illustrate anything. I will show you later. So I want to show these two exhibitions. I do not feel comfortable with the term intervention for what I'm presenting, or even general, as it insinuates that artists might have a kind of supernatural relationship with historic art or curatorial work, or would take a passive role regarding the mechanisms that define museology or critical debate. I haven't experienced it in that way, quite the opposite. I sense that artists have, from the secessions to artist-run initiatives of this world, co-authored and transformed the image and the formats of what constitutes an art publicity, which is why I would rather speak about involvement instead of intervention for these examples. As much as I'm grateful for the artist's privilege to choose her or his sense of time and to enter from different viewpoints than historians or museum professionals would have to, it seems dangerous to me to deduce anything from that, or to deduce any specific formats or tasks from there. So what I'm showing now, it comes from happy relationships, while an intervention in a military sense maybe would mean a precisely planned takeover, an acceptance of the art world as a rigid system, or as rigid systems of claims and territories that excludes whatever appears as volatile, inaccurate, loose, not easily captured, and the opportunity to open up to artworks rather than strategize with them. I will speak about two exhibitions, both collaborations with curators. In one case, a gallery was even involved, in which I connect with and consisted only of works of which I'm not the author. The first, Abstrakter Raum, took place 10 years ago in this house, and the other, Paul Bonnet drawings, in the CAPC Bordeaux, and 2018 at Galerie Buchholz in New York. The first was based on the study collection of pre-war art collected mostly by Mumok's founding director, Werner Hoffmann. The other consisted of a convolute of drawings of the Art Deco-related book designer Paul Bonnet. Already in limbo. Sorry. Oh, I don't. Okay, sorry. The collection of classical modernism at Mumok could be seen as a fragment, displaying the discourses and views from the early 60s. Susanne Neuburger had started to discuss this part of the collection together with Katrin Bichler and artist duo Clegg and Gutman, resulting in their exhibition, The Moderns, Revolutions in Art and Science, 1890 to 1934, a few years earlier. This is how a series of artist dialogues with the collection has started, which was followed by Ulrike Müller and Martin Beck and others consequentially. For Matthias Michalka, my corresponding curator in this, and myself, it was the blank spaces in different ways that matters. And we tried to add works from public and private lenders from Central Europe mostly to widen its medial and geographic radius. We built an architectural grid to raster a terminology that enabled us to connect with the works shown. Abstraction is used in the title, was less a formal principle to us than a means to create or recreate abstract relationships. Its sections were freely titled, somewhat guided by the, for me, very successful exhibition Art and Utopia at MACBA years before, or the fantastic Dada display in the Pompidou. They were titled Konstruktion, Fläche, Raum, Übergänge, Portraits, Raum und Tanz, Bühne und Raum, konkrete Medien, Zwischenräume des Gegenständlichen, Alphabete und Zeichensysteme, Konzepte der Abstraktion. So there was no kind of historic or central narrative, but things that would depart from the specific works. I would like to show some of Raoul Hausmann's drawings titled Abstrakte Bildidee, or that's how they are named in the collection. I would like to show them at first, before I'm moving on with some constellations and views from the exhibit. Because these works guided us through the collection in some sense. I very much love these pieces to this day. Two of them from the late 1910s, 10 works altogether. I will show just 4 of them. So this is the first 2, this is the late 10s, and here's some more examples. Their content or what they comment on does not appear genuine in the context of the time even, but we see how Hausmann receives, how he improvises and playfully varies. My point is that we might encounter abstract visual vocabulary as a communication system, a means of perception as opposed to a style. I like to see exhibitions as reagents, as spaces of possible interaction, rather than consequential sequences. In that spirit, our editions were gently chosen, not trying to confront or complete possible narratives. I'm showing some examples of constellations in the show as I remember them best. So this is a repost from 11 years ago. We included some artists whose wider reception just seemed to revive, like Wolfgang Pahln or Toyen, but lesser knowns like Hans Fritz Würfelbühne, together with the Würfelbühne, together with Kiesler's Raumstadt or Tatlin's stage models. We showed stunning designs for a children's game on urbanism by Ladisław Supna, together with Neurath's Atlas and Herbert Bayer's or Jost Schmidt's modular alphabets. More daring, we showed Irena Blühower's social realism together with Kokoschka's portrait of Karl Kraus and Gerstel's Schönberg family. So that would be the raster, which was architecturally put in the Ebene, what was then 8. It's the upper floor. And here's a couple of views. So that would be the Tatlin models with Moholy and the Würfelbühne, Hans Fritz. That would be the surrealist section with Toyen and Palm. We put a vast magazine collection in the center of the room, and we showed their covers mainly. So this was the central room with magazines, and this is the section of Ladislav Sutna's Game and Neurath. And that is the last constellation of social photography from Slovakia, as I mentioned, with the Kalkaus. And what's not to be seen is the Schönberg family. In this case, it's not Blyova, it's Sergei Protopopov, I think so. Anyway, so the other exhibition I will show started with an unexpected discovery. It's rather small. Some years ago, Daniel Buchholz, Christopher Müller, and I found a convolute of drawings for book designs by Paul Bonnet in a Paris bookstore. I had seen single drawings before, and I acquired them because I found them beautiful. But in this find, about 200 drawings and photographs, this appeared like an invitation to his workshop, an insight in different stages of his design processes, a visual language in the making. While Bonnet's often eccentric bindings, I will just go on and show you some of these drawings while I speak. I hope that's all right. While Bonnet's often eccentric bindings of livres artistes and literature are much desired collector's items, the drawings are more difficult to classify. Where do they belong? Art or design museums, libraries. We tried not to lose the spirit of the atelier and put his assignments, typologies, his vocabulary, and in its culminating points in the foreground. What appealed to me more than anything else was the serialism of the geometric compositions and their comparatively discrete quality. The covers bear no titles, let alone illustrations or photographs. The author's names and, in much smaller point, the titles are relegated to the spines. Each author appears to have his own dedicated compositional scheme, horizontal bands resembling piano keyboards in reddish orange and black for Malraux, kaleidoscopic, semicircular, gold-embossed formations arranged in various symmetries with a dot grid pattern for André Gide, compositions based on horizontal lines of varying widths for Paul Valéry, etc. These designs, some look abstract and austere, while a few others feature figurative representations or veritable clusters of heraldic or calligraphic symbols, cast a spell over me that has not faded. One reason may be that they seem not to confront to any of the design categories of avant-garde books, book art, or modernist graphic art, which generally seek to strike a balance between the title, i.e. the printed word, and illustration or non-illustration, and compositional attributes that, however independent of these primary elements they may appear to be, usually serve to underscore the content. Traditionally, the embossed cover is a self-contained item. Its designs separate from that of the book. In many cases, It is simply the binding into which a book or manuscript was inserted for a library. The title, as a required identifier, is placed accordingly on the spine. The front and back covers are designed to match the library, not the content they enclose. This convention leaves room for embellishments and graphic structures that constitute a distinctive texture irrespective of the book's content. The book, that is to say, bears no cover in today's sense. Rather, its face is a kind of blank. Each attests to the design system rooted in Bonnet's style and craftsmanship, compositional sketches, fine drawings with a number system for the embossing clichés, as well as painted drafts for book covers destined for further revision. Combining embossed, drawn, and painted templates, they include color specifications and numberings. Bonnet uses basic graphic elements, i.e. lines and circles, as well as ornamental stamps and metal lettering. These drawings by Bonnet are part of a larger oeuvre of bookbindings that span the period from 1925 until his death in 1971. Bonnet is regarded as a leading French designer of Art Deco, embossed covers, a stylistic label that best fits his early oeuvre. He explicitly acknowledged the earlier designers such as Pierre Legrand and Rose Adler, from whose work he drew inspiration. The bookbindings created by the reliure artists of the 20th century form a distinctive strand that is chosen, interwoven with the French cultural and intellectual life of that time. Bonnet's individual style stands out most importantly for its musical quality. The characteristic feature of his designs is the almost incantatory repetition of forms. In a set of works for the popular market, the 552 designs for the Cartonnage de la NAF, published by Gallimard, Bonnet adapts his style to embossed cardboard. We have assembled selected drawings in small groups that illustrate Bonnet's approach, how he went about crafting an individual design or system of elements. As I studied his drawings, the functional aspect, the book, object as the ultimate focus of all efforts, tended to recede from view. What makes these works singular is the way they negotiate a blank surface, the amplifying, concentrating, and dismantling of forms, a distinctive voice that accompanies that of a literary work. I will show a few more. You can't get enough of it, right? And then show some of the constellations. So this was the exhibition in Galerie Buchholz in 2018, the Between of Spines and the group. And then the other show at the CAPC, collaboration with Alice Motard in Bordeaux the year later. Let me just say, I never intended to collide or compete with curating, and nor will I. And I very much think that the life of an artist actually leads away from the examples of the past. But I hope what I can offer in this context is myself as a recipient. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Florian, for this really sensitive insight. And also, I'm sure there are already now some questions in the air in relation to the role of the artist as curator or not. But we will see this in the coming presentations as well. Our next guest is Susanne Titz. Susanne Titz is an art historian and director of the Städtisches Museum Abteiberg in Mönchengladbach. She studied history, art history, and Roman languages and literature in Cologne, Hamburg, and Bonn. From 1997 to 2004, she was the artistic director of the Neue Aachener Kunstverein in Aachen. Since 2004, she has been director of the Museum Abteiberg in Mönchengladbach. Susanne Titz has focused on developments in art since the 1960s and is linking her work repeatedly to the characteristics and the history of the Mönchengladbach Museum in the form of site-specific projects. At the moment, she shows institutional critique, the museum as a place of permanent conference, Lang, portraits, and workshop report collection, Archive Anders, Beuys. Among her recent curatorial projects were exhibitions such as Jutta Köter, Libertine, From There On, Space, Work, Visualizations of the Anti-Museum, 1967 to 1978, Monika Bär, Great Joyride, Hans Hollein, Everything is Architecture, together with Wilfried Kühn, or R.H. Greatman, Chapter 24. Susanne Titz realizes exhibitions that question the institution and enable new insights regarding the use of the collection and the artistic work also with the collection. And we are very curious to hear your thoughts now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for this conference because it gives kind of impact and inspiration. So what I want to point on is maybe not so far away from Florian Pumho's thought that an artist is not intervening the institution, but there is another role. When did it start? From when on was there a consciousness for the displays of works of art? The reflection of a difference that may lay there in all possible constellations of them. A reflection of the differences of perception of the ways the objects are looking like in the museums. The idea of different ways we could do curatorial museum work. I don't know, though there is an art historical research going on, though there is a certain re-evaluation of the multifold ideas of displays, their ideologies, and institutions. I just know that there is the active role of artists themselves. Artist work with collections is work within the architecture, content, and choreography of a given museum. In my experience, it is a continuous advice to rethink the very structure of the institution, a view from the outside, as far as we consider that we, the curators, directors, professionals in the institutions, are the inside. So adding to Florian Pumho's well-reflected point of critique, it is an intervention from the outside, but as well or even more from the inside. As we are having these institutions, these museums for contemporary art, just because of these artists and for the benefit of their representation in the institution. We just normally take their artistic work over and do the job of hanging, positioning, putting the object on a socle. As a matter of labor division, a division of work, responsibilities, and authorities. In most cases of our daily decision-making processes, we even think that we are having a sharper eye and better expertise in the positioning of artistic work. As we all know that artists are egocentric, and so is their idea of a hanging. That means representation in the museum. Therefore, we curators do better. Let me opt for the next 15 minutes for another perspective. There is a quite prominent question if in fact the artists do better. I won't generalize, it is not a given talent, and there is a lot of art which is dedicated to the nail, the frame, the socle that we, the curators, choose. But there is a quite important historical notion that artists did recently do important work for museum collections. And even if we sometimes heard about the super curators or a meta-artistic position of some curators, it might be in fact very important to register that the historical progress in museums and their current strategies to keep us, the visitors, the audiences, the media, attracted for contemporary art are strategies that were mainly not invented by us, but by the artists. Artists are our best colleagues, or let's put it into a relationship that tells also about the fragile existence of a curator in a museum of contemporary art. Artists are our most professional advisors, our main influencers, and sometimes even our institutional coaches. I wouldn't call in these cases just a work with a collection, or I wouldn't call it, in these cases, just a work with a collection, but a work with and for the favor of the collecting institution. Dealing with the collecting institution, that means producing an artistic project that reflects the institution and shows a different order, a different display, meant in the 1960s, quite important and radical, as its very start, a totally different sort of objects, unusual materials, as well as different ambiances of reception in the known museum institution. Let's see the old museum in Mönchengladbach in the era 1967 to 78. It was artists like Joseph Beuys, Marcel Brotas, Daniel Buren. They realized exhibitions which took over the museum institution, a then rather small and provisionary villa museum, which gave path to Museum Abteiberg, the famous museum designed by the Viennese architect Hans Hollein. And they produced, in all these cases, propositions or propositions, and the term by Daniel Buren, which showed unforeseen displays of objects, texts, and media surrounding again and again, if you watch it from far, from nowadays, the very institution of the museum. Beuys, 1967. See Beuys' first major museum exhibition that happened 1967 in the old municipal museum in Mönchengladbach. It was an anthropological site of mystical found objects and vitrines, materials and forms of mainly relict kind, leaning on walls and laying on the floors. The whole presentation, including the opening speech by a Catholic priest from Vienna, argued for the necessity of a much broader definition of art museum and art, as well as the necessity of an intellectual turn from the big contemporary now towards a revision of history, cultural and natural history, human society as such, art as connected to anthropology. The complete exhibition in Mönchengladbach got acquired by the collection Ströer and formed the core and start for Block Beuys in Darmstadt. Beuys continued and extended his complex in the encyclopedical context of the Landesmuseum in Darmstadt, and it forms since then a proper department in the institution. Brotas, 1968. The most prominent artistic reflection on the institution museum is maybe the fiction of the Musée d'Art Moderne Département des Aigles by Marcel Brotas. Johannes Kladders, the museum director from Mönchengladbach, held the opening speech. Schüttelt Staub ab, take off the dust was the title. It was extended then in a catalogue that he produced right after Das Anti-Museum, Gedanken zur Kunstpflege, the Anti-Museum, Thoughts on the Care of Art. In 1971, then, Marcel Brotas did a project in Mönchengladbach, Film as Object, Object as Film. And in a way, if you see it here, it's kind of working with the interpretation, working with the reception of art, with given media. It was kind of an art historical research or an art historical extended lecture, but even it was an exhibition which only took 1 week. The didactical impulse, the activated view, the museum as a screening room, that was the idea of Brotas at that time. And Brotas was like Beuys, not working with the collection of the museum, but with the institution. Then it was another example in that time, Daniel Buren. He showed twice. First, he did a project which you see here happened in 14 cities in Western Germany, and it was indicating, marking the museum as an institution and the outside. So it was also on buses, it was on advertising scenes, it was in shops. And you see on the right side the very specific medium that Clutters, the museum director, then produced for that purpose, for every show, which to him was like a new step. It was the box catalog, and you would have then some constellation of texts, of things that the artists produced mostly themselves and did put into the box. And so here you see already that the frame theory of Buren was part of the box catalog. And later, 4 years later, he prepared the second part of his presentation. And this was happening only in the old museum. Here you see also these historical villa spaces. And it was a kind of intervention into a museum which showed the former exhibitions since 1967 in this building. And down there you see how Buren reports all the shows which happened one after the other in this building since 1967. He gave a floor plan, and he created, in a way, a parallel view on different modes of exhibiting. Then one other aspect may be very interesting, because then we pass to the new museum, to our museum now, is Hans Hollein, then someone who was very much focused on ideas that were also touched by the artists at that time. So he was really inspired by pop art as well as process art as well as minimal art. And he was the publisher of Der Bau in the 1960s, as the Viennese might know. He did a show first while he was a professor at the Art Academy in Düsseldorf on death. And here you see how he created a post-historical scenery in the old museum. And the Coca-Cola bottle, as well as a helmet of a fireman, were exposed as all these relics. Nobody knows what they were for. So like it's this fiction of a situation after our times, and after our times, who will know what we were doing? So this was, maybe a little too early, this was in a way a ruined site, the museum after the museum. And this led, in a way, maybe in a very, very concrete way, to the idea of a new museum building that by chance got a design by Hans Hollein, just because the museum director was allowed to build with an architect of his choice. And this is extraordinary, and at that time it meant also a very close collaboration. So Hollein and Clarice even had holidays together, they told me, and they created a constellation of spaces which you might already see here as a total contrary to the traditional museum concept. And so apart from the fact that there are very different spaces and that there is no chronology, not the Uffizien way of going from one epoch to the next, there is also, and I find this drawing on the left-hand side very interesting, it's almost only collection. So they thought about a collecting institute. And the exhibition space was just, the temporary exhibition is 180 square meters. So maybe our building is one of the last museums of the old kind again, just because now we would need much larger spaces. And here you see how then, in a way, a transfer happened to the new museum, and how these protagonists of that time switched over into 1982, because it took 10 years to finish the museum building. And then it was 1982, and this museum was then also titled the first museum of postmodernism, even if Centre Pompidou was the parallel, but they were earlier, before one started to discuss postmodernism in a design or architectural way in a broader sense. And so this museum got very famous for its kind of glamorous state. You can see it on the right-hand side, these neon lights, which are a little like an airport, very futuristic. At the same time, you see, well, Hollein used the metaphor of rice terraces, and he used the metaphor for this tower building as a crystal drusus, which is the inside of the modern cube. So what you see now as a rather typical bank architecture was at that time revolutionary. It was kind of a new sort of building, and you also see the zinc facades, which were quoting the dying textile industry, so industrial sheds, which were indicating a connection between the museum and the city, even if now, of course, zinc facades are also part of the details of postmodern museum architecture. So at that time, lots of aspects in this museum details were new, but in our view now, we see that there was something not really, maybe it was not in fashion anymore, and that was the emancipatory, and that was kind of the human space that they both had in mind when they started the design in 1972. So what we try to experience now together with the artists is a building which is talking about the object which is in one space with you, and which is in a way related to everything outside, and which is in an intimate relationship to everything, not on the socle, not on the pedestal, maybe not covered with a plexi if not necessary. So here you see some of these early things. So Robert Morris was collaborating in a project where he showed his ideas from the 1960s, late 60s works in this context. And suddenly we had the chance to talk about the relationships between architecture and ideas of late 60s contemporary art. And here you see, for the second time, the protagonist revolutionary piano by Joseph Beuys, and the UFO lamp, which is a contemporary to Hollein. And here you see, well, Nairi Bagramian just opened at Secession here. And here you see a project that she did where she insisted to work together with others and not to do a solo show, and to work in the collection. And here you see it's kind of a storage like Joseph Beuys had in mind, but this is only one of the rehearsals. So we had 4 different stages of the exhibition. All the objects always change their position. Next, maybe a very kind of conceptual device of what we are thinking about now in this collaboration with artists is Rebecca Quaitman. Rebecca Quaitman did a show in Mönchengladbach, which was the chapter 24. You might know she's working in chapters since 2001. And in a way, she as an artist introduced us very much into a historical thinking of, well, the relation of art history and history at all in the 20th century. Now she's going far beyond, like to the back. But at that time, it was very important for her to pass the avant-garde or to touch the avant-garde once anew. And here you see kind of the Mönchengladbach avant-garde. So the audience at the opening ceremony of the Beuys show is the original photo from the archive, and then 2 works by R.H. Quaitman, which formed her show. And here you see how she worked with works from our collection, and it's a reproduction that she creates, which is then, you see it in the next one, a little here a little better visible as something where she maybe creates an X-ray, or maybe creates something like the transversion of an object that she found. Most times it was objects of art from the collection photographed by her, but it was also like Sigmar Polke on the right-hand side. But it was sometimes also a reproduction from the archive on the left-hand side. And you see it's an original Coptic textile from our old historical collection. And all that on a shelf. And soon I will, in context of Jutta Köter, tell you that the shelves are maybe something which we deserve now as artistic devices in museums. This is another example of R.H. Quaitman's transversions. So you see a scratched canvas from our collection reproduced, and then there is vase infiltrated, and it looks suddenly like a vulva. It's something where the open and the closed is a totally different definition compared to the abstract. So Quaitman is then, for example, not only with colors, but also with kind of the way she uses materials in painting, then transgressing from the two-dimensional and from the abstract to something which is very physical. Next example is Jutta Köter, or the second last. Jutta Köter, who did a show in 2019, which was the one following her retrospective in Munich and Luxembourg. Maybe you saw photos of this installation from Luxembourg or Munich. She used these devices, these glass walls, at Museum Abteiberg, and did put them just in the central space of the museum. And then she hung there her own works, which were not produced for the show, but already existed before, Tour de Madame, which traveled already and was in a way more a reception of Cy Twombly's cycle in Munich than of anything in the Museum Abteiberg. And then she added works from our collection to these glass walls. And as you see there on the right-hand side, it's also showing Martin Kippenberger's kind of stick-together canvases in the back. So you see lots of backsides, you see lots of structures, and the very material appearance of the works, like Dieter Roth just sitting on the floor, which was never happening since the museum acquired this work. Here you see how, just as an example, how artists then introduce themselves a sort of interpretation of the collection, which I would define also as something which is very close to what Abi Warburg was talking about when he spoke about the Stellagen or about the vehicles. So kind of you ship something on a hold, on a shelf, on something, and then you create new constellations, and you have the device somewhere in the institution which shows that things are now related together just for a minute, a second, and maybe only for that time, for that moment. So in this case of Jutta Köter, we spoke a lot also with Sabet Buchmann. We had the Detour, so other artists were joining and art historians were joining, just because it was so important in that show to get to also to the 18th century and back really to art history. In our show that we have currently till tomorrow, is Guylaine Leung the one who decides. And Guylaine Leung is also taking over the same space. And I want to show you this finally as an example where an artist does scores. And she, well, by the way, due to COVID, she was not able to travel to be present in the production of the show. So we created a new model, but for her, it's always central to do scores. So she told us that we would have the duty to create this production of the arches. So you see the welcome arch. 4 of them we produced, and then you see the browns. Score was all available browns, all available walls in brown to standard picture hanging height. And so she took over again the whole institution. Here you see Isa Gensken got kind of a negative shadow or something where in the back of Gensken, the daughters, this tiny necklace appears. And in the first or the final space, you even see that there is an old painting hanging, and Guylaine Leung is creating a story out of that, which we just started now to work on, because The Onions is a work which is a copy of a Renoir, and the Renoir was in the possession of her grandmother. And it's a Frankfurt Jewish story. And Guylaine Leung, as some of you might know, is from the other half of the family. She is Hong Kong Chinese. And so there is something, she's based in London. She's now thinking about the whole immigration story. And Onions was produced as a copy just because the family needed to sell the original one. Not so long ago. And so therefore this copy is kind of a relic, a fetish, and something which is a very family-like residue of the avant-gardes there. We are now in conversations with her to have this work continuously in the museum. And it's a strange sort of, and that is my maybe final point, that we are again in a sort of reflection on the institution, which we didn't think about, but which we had on the agenda. So we are doing all the provenance research now on the very old parts of the collection, or the older ones. And just now, Guylaine Leung showed us a way to start from a very concrete point. And we are having then The Onions of Renoir in the middle space between Gerhard Richter and Sigmar Polke. And it's maybe not so bad for a minute or for a longer minute, and then we do it again somewhere else. So that's kind of the tour d'horizon. And it's just a moment, and it's, in my view, something which is very, very inspiring, just because it's not curatorial ideas, but it's something which creates another step, another layer in art history and in museums, just because artists have a certain knowledge of art history and of the whole institution they're working in. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you so much for these insights into the practice of artists who relate their work really closely to your building and also to your collection. Our third guest this afternoon is Tania Bruguera. Tania Bruguera was born in Havanna, where she also lived mainly in the past. Tania Bruguera choreographs political performances that examine institutionalized injustice. She received her MFAs in painting and in performance from Instituto Superior de Arte in Havanna and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Bruguera's work has been exhibited at Documenta 11, the Guggenheim Museum, and the Tate Modern, and also at the Changzhou Biennial, the Istanbul Biennial, Shanghai Biennial, and in many other places. Her work is in permanent collections of many institutions around the world, including the Bronx Museum of the Arts, the Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes de la Havanna, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Tate Modern, and the Guggenheim. Tania Bruguera has been outspoken about the Cuban government and its oppressive politics and was put under house arrest in Cuba about a year ago. She left Cuba this August to take the post of a senior lecturer in media and performance in Harvard. But she only agreed to depart the country if the government pledged to release a group of prisoners, including the rapper Michael Castillo Perez. Bruguera creates proposals and aesthetic models that examine the social effects of political and economic power. She often collaborates with multiple institutions as well as with many individuals, so that the full realization of her long-term projects occur when others adopt and perpetuate it. Her projects include intensive interventions on the institutional structure of collective memory and education. A central concept for her understanding of visual art is timing-specific art, on which she will speak now. Thank you for being here so much.
Thank you for inviting me. As you might know, the Ludwig Foundation has a very important relationship with the development of art in Cuba. I want to especially welcome Bettina for inviting me, and also Brigitte Francine, with whom I had by now have a relationship as friends, and who also showed me that the Ludwig Foundation could be actually a companion to artists. I have for a long time been in contradiction with some of the art historians, because they try to impose on you certain concepts that actually have not previously looked at. Let me put the timing one second. Had not looked at the practice, where your practice comes from, but just trying to impose certain, universal concepts. So political timing specific is something that I came up after I realized that the art I was doing was not only related to the time, the place, or the people, but also the political environment, meaning how was the emotional vulnerability of people in terms of politics in a certain specific moment and place. And I'm going to show you a few examples of how I deal with this. In this time when artists' risks are not welcome, museum can be a very good companion to artists, and the place where we can create things that are not conceivable anywhere else. Here we are seeing one of the pieces that I've done for the Tate, and this is when, for example, art was conceived as basically the artist's main fantasy. This is one of the relations of the museum. Museums could mutate from being the place where time was stopped to become the place where time is speeded. I won't talk today about the role of museums as collecting institutions or how they should deal with their original guilt as cultural extractors, neither about how they are the sharpened shapers of a narrative that sometimes had nothing to do with the original context of the work or the political intention of the artist. I'm going to talk about the role in the shaping of our history. I want to talk about the museum as a place where people who are not familiar with art and who think art is not for them can engage with art. Sometimes museums understand integration as numbers that need to be achieved among visitors, instead of seeing such demographic as people for whom the museum could be a catalyst, a device from which to see themselves differently. Museums could stop looking at those who are not drawn to visit the installation as a desirable target and start thinking that what the museum can do for them, how to invite people who are not naturally related to museums to be part of them. And I want to emphasize, be part of them. There is a community of people who could benefit from a relationship with a museum, beyond what the museum thinks is beneficial for them. How should we generate such an invitation? One of the first things to think about is from which door they are going to enter the institution, and how much of the symbolic capital is the institution willing to share with them. But before we even start talking about it, we need to stop conceiving working with communities or with minorities as events and start creating long-lasting relationships that could create an ecosystem of growth for those who are part of it. I would like to bring some examples of projects I have worked within institution and trying to address this. This piece is called Tattling Whisper, and it was done at the Tate, which it was quite successful, and it took me a while to understand why it was successful. And I think it was because it's such a reference to our history. And part of what museums like is self-reference. And basically this, we could say, is actually a living painting of heroic moment where you have the horses. In this case, what I did was to realize one of my fantasy, which is try to manipulate the police and bring it to the museum, in this case, using the people who came to the museum as just a mass, without names, without stories, just a mass that could be corralled from one side to the other with the technique of the police. Here, I'm going to show you another collaboration with the museum. This is with the Queen's Museum with Tom Fingerpearl. Here, the institution was able to decentralize in order to engage with the community. So instead of trying to bring the community to a museum, they were able and willing to go to the community and take shape there. They were able to be okay with my answer when they say, what do you want to do? And I say, I don't know. Because I thought the piece had to be shaped by the immigrants, not by the artists who came to the space. So this is still up to today. This is a community of people who have created bonds with that museum. And even after we, quote unquote, officially finished the project 5 years after, they keep having a relationship with the museum. They bring their kids to the museum, and they actually engage with some decision makings in the museum, even if the director has changed. So it was part of my job as an artist to make sure that the museum understood how they were related to the people living next to it. Queen's Museum is not the Met, it's not in the middle of Manhattan, it's in a place where a lot of immigrants live. So as an artist, I wanted to push what they have done so far. After the project finished, we went in to create other projects with them. So the immigrants who were in that project, they work on a project at the immigration department of the mayor's office of New York, and they have even worked in different cultural institutions up to today. So here, for me as an artist, the idea of an audience was eliminated, and those who were expert for art, or historians or critics, were actually put in a position of an audience that was ignorant, because they had to do a very intense work to understand what I was doing, because it was not enough to come, see an event, and leave, and then write an article about how good or bad the project was. This created a lot of problems, because a lot of people tried to understand this social engaged project as one event, and wanted to take their conclusion after they saw just 1 hour of the life of the event. So I think that also put a pressure And we had a big discussion with the other historians about how social engaged art had to challenge the way in which it is written about. So not only we were creating this relationship with the museum, where the museum is, works for the community, and they have to listen to the community to create their programming. I also did another project with the Guggenheim, which was just a performance, but it was actually another way to use the museum. I had the opportunity to have a budget where we could have this postcard printed. And the postcard basically asked for Pope Francis to give Vatican citizenship to all the immigrants in the world, regardless of their religious point of view or practices. And what the museum was good for is like, this is an idea that I had for a long time, and they were able to make it massive, to bring it to a scale that otherwise was too small to even be thought about, or for the immigrants to think is important. So I think the other thing the museums can do is generate the sense of importance to communities that think nobody cares about them. So another project I did was with the Van Abbe Museum, which you guys mentioned here. And I did the Museum of Arte Útil, so it was the museum inside the museum. And the whole idea was to rethink with the curators of the museum and the director, what is the role of museums as an institution? So for me, yes, I wanted to bring the idea of arte útil or useful art as a conversation within the museum, but also it was a way for me, an opportunity for me to, instead of being outside as an artist and propose something, to actually be inside the institution and talk with them and shape with them the ideas I was bringing that were unfinished. And in this case, some of the things we debated a lot is what are the limits the museum can go to. I remember that I proposed them to have two kinds of entry. One is the people who will engage, so they will be users of the project, and the other one is just viewers. So I think some of these conversations were very, very good for me as an artist, and it was a great opportunity to discuss that. The other project I have done that I want to talk today is with an institution. It's the latest I've done with an institution, was the commission for the Turbine Hall at the Tate. I proposed to create a group called Tate Neighbors. What I questioned myself when I received this commission was, how can such an important international institution could be also important for those who live around them, for those who are the neighbors, who actually sometimes don't even enter the museum. And that happens a lot. I don't know here if it happens, but in many countries it happens that you have an amazing museum that is actually leading the conversation internationally about where art is going, but then it has no relationship with the actual people who live next to it. So I was really interested in this idea. And I also was interested in asking those people, what do they need in order to feel that the museum belonged to them? So basically what I did was I created the Tate Neighbors. It was exasperating because we had so many meetings. I also wanted to do a kind of first-time Turbine Hall commission that is social engaged art instead of objects. So it was a lot of work meeting. And we realized at some point that one of the things that they felt uncomfortable with is how today we talk about the idea of giving, the idea of contributing, and how different museum thinks about contribution and they as audience think so. So what we decided was to make voting. I like democracy. So we vote, and they selected the person they admired the most in the neighborhood. And this is Natalie Bell, who is the daughter of some immigrants. And actually, has been for 25 years social worker in the area and has helped a lot of youth in trouble, at risk, and a lot of, now she's focusing on elders. So she was very loved. So we decided to actually put the name of one of the two buildings at the Tate, would name one of the two buildings with her name. And I have to say that it was an extraordinary experience because, as I always work with the institution, it is a negotiation, but it's more than anything a conversation. It is more than anything a relationship that we create where we criticize each other, and with the institution is willing to see what are the blind spots do they have. I have to acknowledge that Frances Morris was amazing. She's the director of the Tate, and she was really on board from the first day. She had to hear very strong criticism in those meetings, but she did it. She went through it, and she took notes, and she changed some of the things, so she heard. One of the things that I was worried about is the idea of the event. You know, how very quickly, and then it's like, check, it's done. We did this with this community. So Frances started talking about what is the legacy of the project. And actually, she was able to convince everyone, I'm sure the people who are developing the department is not happy about it, to keep the name permanently. So this is what I mean by when you work in institutions, have a commitment. And now those people you see there plus others are still feeling they're part of the institution, and they go there and they work with them and they propose things to them. But more than that, at some point in the meeting, we decided that naming is not enough. So Natalie Bell has been made part of the council, advisory council of the Tate. So now they have someone from the neighborhood who has no idea what art is, has no training as art, super amazing person, super sensitive, but she's going to bring, and she's bringing in this meeting, the perspective of the neighborhood. So because I'm here, and this is for, Ludwig, and I have a recent relationship with Ludwig Foundation, I wanted to say that also another way in which I have worked, and this has happened with Brigitte, is that as a way to, I have to confess something. Sometimes I do my work and I don't think it's very important. And then people like, Brigitte come and say, let's collect that piece, And I'm like, really? Okay. So it was very interesting because I did this piece after a series of interrogation sessions that I had in Cuba, because I wanted to do a project in the streets that was forbidden because political reasons. So in the process of interrogation, I felt that I could teach or be of help to this interrogator who had no idea what art is. And I started explaining her what performance is, what's the difference between theater and performance, and so on. And then I left the interrogation thinking, you know what, I should do this in a different way, more stable. So the Havanna Biennial was coming. I knew the government was going to create all the rumors about me, that I was a bad person, whatever, and I was going to do something wrong. So I decided to use the technique of the police. So I self-surveilled myself. I put a camera 24/7 who was recording what I was doing to prove, and I actually had to prove it at some point, that I was not in somewhere else doing something bad. So in this case, what I did, I read the Hannah Arendt book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. I put the little speaker outside, and I realized that I could not go out of my house, but the sound could travel freely. So ironically enough, and I'm very proud of this, the Cuban government found a solution that was very creative. Usually they're not creative. So they brought this hack jammer brigade in front of my house. They were doing works in old Havanna, but it was not the time for my place, So they moved them to where I live. And it was very bizarre. I have another photo where you see that they did it from the beginning of my house to the end of my house. So they were not very discreet, let's say. So basically, I felt that My relationship with Brigitte and the process has been amazing because we have been looking at how can we keep the experience, not the data, not the gesture, not the facts, because anybody can sit down and read Hannah Arendt's book from beginning to end without stopping for 5 days. But how can we create an atmosphere that transport the fear that we were feeling and how hard it was for people to approach the house and join the reading. And actually, I took the doors of my house. It's funny because before presenting, I was asking Brigitte, do we have everything out of Cuba already? She's like, yeah, you're good. Because we had to take everything pretending was something else. So I took out the doors of my house and the gates of my house, and we're reproducing the space exactly as it is. And unfortunately, we were going to show it when Trump was in power, which is perfect environment for this piece. But now, thank God, he's not there, so we're going to show it probably next year. For me, it was very important because after all this situation, somebody from an institution that is important for Cuba has come and acquired the piece. And yeah, so basically, museums are a place where artists are challenged, not only because they put themselves in front of the history of art, but because museums are a place from where to challenge the story of the present. It has also come the time for constructive institutional critique, because as we have seen recently, strong institutions are extremely important for democracy and to prevent and actually help to prevent the same mistake to be done. So basically, what I want to propose with my work with the institution is a process that allows all the communities to use the museum instead of the museum using them. Thank you.
Thank you once again for all these great presentations and for showing us the different possibilities to relate artistic work to the institution and to find possibilities to rethink the institution, as you put it. I thought we start with a very general, really general and basic question for all here. We are all aware how important it is to involve the artist into institutional practices and to have the possibility to get other insights beside what the curators or the institutional staff usually is getting. But maybe we can define it a little bit precise, what exactly is it? Because we are here talking very often, yes, there are the institutions, there is the curatorial work, and then the artist is coming and telling us something. Yeah. But is there a possibility to define this a bit more precisely in terms of what can the artist do, what the curator can't? Hans Hollein, for example, not Hans, Max Hollein, sorry, yesterday told us that also the institutions are not one thing. He has 3 experts on Renaissance paintings fighting strongly and trying to go into different directions. So also within the institutions, there are very often attempts to rethink what the institution is doing. But what is it that the artist is able to add to this institutional self-critique?
Well, one thing I always tell my students is you have to know your partner. And you don't have to dance with every partner. So I think the first thing is for the artist to choose properly the institution they want to work with. It's not because the name, but because are they ready and willing to be open for that self-criticism? Because some institutions will never, ever be open to any self-criticism, unless from an artist. So I think that's the first thing, how to understand the invitation they do for you, and how willing are you to not do it. Because many times we negotiate, and by the end we do stuff that is not what we wanted. I'm talking as an artist. So are you willing to, is this so important for you that you're willing to not do the exhibition if they say no? But I think is, I don't know, I think it's also, in my personal case, I'm very interested, because my performative background, and what is the concept of an audience. And what I actually did at the Tate Turbine was take out one person out of the multitude of audiences and make that person the focus of the project, which is Natalie Bell, the person that the building was named after. So I think this is, for me, one of the exercises that is harder, especially if the exhibitions, the institutions are big, because many times we see audiences like a general mass of people that we divide maybe in 2 or 3. But yeah, so I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but. Yeah.
In a way, yeah. Maybe we can continue with attempts to answer.
Something very practical, or my recent experience, maybe more relating to another project that we did during COVID with Andrea Bowers. It was my experience to work with the audience in a different way when the artist is present. And this is even possible when it's digital. So to have the ideas or the artistic argument somewhere very close, for example, to a young audience, means that you create, well, at the late point, you create role models. You create persons who tell you something about a living, about a professional work, which is not close to the proper side. And that is a sort of influence which is also, in my view, infecting the institution itself. Just because there are also others than these young ones are suddenly also possessing a certain knowledge. And they ask us these questions you were mentioning. And I think that this way of connecting with the audience, it's not name dropping, but it's kind of a presence, a direct experience of art as something which is now and which is very close to you and not something which comes from a metropole or from somewhere.
One second. Another thing, and I agree with what you said, but another thing is important for the institution to understand that criticism is care. Mm-hmm. So we are not criticizing the institution, and Francis Mori was amazing about it, amazing. So we are not criticizing the institution because we want it to close or we don't like it. It's just because we admire and like it so much that we want to be better. Mm-hmm. You know, so we have expectations, you know.
Yeah, Florian, from your background, you started in the late 80s and early 90s, where institutional critique was big, and you had your role in this process, and you're very familiar with it. Would you see your work you're doing with collections or in working with historical materials in institutionalized collections as a form of reflecting institutional practices at the same time, or as criticizing the institutions at the same time? I understood from your presentation that you would rather not be identified as a curator, but at the same time, when you had your show here at Mumok, we had this distinction between the show Abstract Space, where you worked with the collection, and you had your presentation on then level 6 and 7, where you showed individual works, also with historical relations, of course. But how was this difference conceived, or how would you define this?
Well, is this working? Yeah. I don't know, like, I think at some time it very much interested me to not see this so hierarchical, like, or to have a relatively loose relationship between like my authorships and works that I'm not the author of. So this has changed a little bit. Like I have more respect, I think, now. But I mean, maybe to come back to your question, to your first question, it's like I don't know what an artist can do that a museum cannot do, or a curator. Also, I can only say what I cannot do, what a curator can do, and that might be. I don't think, and I also don't want to generalize this, but I cannot synchronize. Yeah, like when I was listening to these conversations and all these kind of very, very good and moral attempts to reform, yeah, I was so overwhelmed. Yeah? And I can only say, and I think that is maybe what I really liked what you were saying is that like there is these things should not be events. Kind of like to and I think this goes to kind of like a reality, or to accept something as present in a way that is something, you know, like an artist I cannot synchronize time. I cannot synchronize attempts. I can only focus on, you know, the specificity in a work. And maybe that's what I was pointing to. Like abstraction is this project that you would also like give away specificity. You would give away a narrative also. And that's an option too. It's just... yeah.
Well, we heard that we have to be careful who is inviting whom, and that it's important to see, also to have the possibility not to accept an invitation. And I think also you in your presentation mentioned that you cannot, you don't believe in the idea of being invited to intervene into something. Yeah. How does your invitation practice look like? Are the artists addressed because you know they are keen to get into a direct dialogue with the collection, or are you interested in them for totally different reasons?
Thank you for this question, because it's never commissioned work. And it's always starting with an interest for a certain work, and then an explanation why. And then we start thinking, and then, of course, the building and the story comes up. And then it ends, sometimes even now, in a reaction of, could you please maybe do something which is not connected to our story, not to the building, so something non-site specific. And so this is really like, we feel also in a structure which is always used, and which is in a way overdose of reference. But still I like it, because every time it's also something happening which we didn't expect, which is turning somewhere else. But to come back to the question, we never say, well, we would like to have this or that, or do please something which is connecting audiences, or which is referring to the 1960s or so. But it's just happening.
Maybe we give the audience also the chance to participate. Are there remarks, comments, questions? Yes, Sabit, thank you.
Okay, you can keep yours. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. That was again super interesting and instructive talks and discussion right now. I would like to link the first panel to yours, since there was this concept of infrastructure, and in the work you showed, the bringing in of new names of neighborhoods to inscribe them into institutions. That I think it's not only about politics of representation in an older sense of institutional critique, but it is really going to the base and to the infrastructure, if you want so. And the same, I think, is true for Guylaine Lung. I would like also to connect to Sophia Rohwetter with two colleagues. We're giving a great paper in a seminar I'm doing at the moment with Martin Beck at the Academy of Fine Arts on infrastructural aesthetics as in resonance with institutional critique. And you focused on Guylaine Lang works, also with regard to the shift within the idea of critique in a very wide sense that is going beyond the idea that it should be only critique of representation, but it should really change or go into the infrastructural space. Probably you can point this out better than me. And there are also some connections to Florian's talk in the way how the infrastructure of art history is part of a project, not only to bring in the big names from, fine arts, but also to look at the designers and a different structure and the connections between fine arts and applied arts. So, yeah, I just wanted to bring in this point, and probably you can elaborate on this, whether that is also part of probably a conscious project you are developing on.
Well, for me, part of the infrastructure or the structure is what question are you asking the institution? Are you asking to the institution? Is it a question of accountability? Is it a question of transparency? Or is it the question of what is their role in society? What is their function? So I feel like as an artist, I've been asking myself a lot, what is the role of art? What is art? We always say, what is art? I always say, what is art for? So I almost feel like because I'm doing this, I need to bring that question to the institution that is going to work with me, because that is what I'm worried about, What is the function of art? I feel like sometimes we still want to do things that have been proven for centuries, but now maybe they're not working so more. So, so it's more about what is the role of institutions in society. And the other thing that worries me a little bit is there is a kind of desire, I don't know if it's osmosis or if it is intentional, that sometimes you go to institutions and they almost feel like everybody wants to be in the same trend. Now is this. And so all the institutions, even institutions whose role is not that, they don't want to be away from that conversation and to that, and that makes me very nervous, because it's kind of a homogenization of art institutions that we are seeing as artists and what they demand from us. This morning they were talking about about that as well. And so I feel like this is more about what are the questions we are willing to ask the institution, and not everybody has the same role. Some museums are just depository to go back and look and be amazed, so not everybody has to be the same. And the last thing I want to say is regarding racism and the inclusion of immigrants and all of that stuff that was talked also in the previous panel. I almost feel like many times we keep doing decisions for the optics. But you cannot eliminate racism in an institution or discrimination of any kind if the institution itself doesn't change the structure. So yes, you have sometimes these amazing African-American curators or Black or whatever, or Latin American, but they are, like they say in the morning, they have to conceive what they want because there is a structure that is 100 years old or whatever that is not being, I just want to say that.
Yeah, to pick this up, I think it is very right that one has to be aware that any criticism operates before a more and more industrial scale, like in terms of mediatization, but also simply in terms of production. And the social museums as social systems as well. And I think this is really like I'm having a hard time generalizing this, because very often like something that is like a representative of criticism or a critical structure or so is traveling in these contexts and turns into its opposite very, very soon. And I think that is why it is important. And industrial, I mean, in the sense of estrangement. Like there is whenever estrangement happens, things become unspecific. And I mean it like really in a Marxist sense in a way. Like if you are estranged to the specific object, if you're estranged to how something sounds, how the relationships really are. And I think that's what we are dealing with.
What I found very inspiring during the last months was when Guylaine Leung was talking about the artist as an institution. So this integration of us all into that, what we are living in and what we are working in, what we are active in or passive. And so this inclusion of the artist, in my view, it was also astonishing, because I thought the second generation of institutional critique already had that in the 90s. But then I thought for a minute, okay, but you were judges and we were judges, and there was something, it was still there was a power thing going on. Maybe you know better examples.
No, can I just say something? Because I've kind of been through the 90s, and I find this somewhat intimidating. Like this idea, I really don't like, having been there. I really don't want to be an institution or anything the like. I don't want to compete with an institution. Nothing the like.
But you are one. Well, Guylaine says yes.
Okay, because we now talked a little bit about also the legacy of this critique of the institution and of the 90s. Already in the 90s, there were many artists who got quite suspicious when they were invited to do critical art in the museum. So this invited critique to fulfill different desires at the same time. That's nothing really new. Andrea Fraser and Helmut Draxler invented a project group called Services. Artists offering their service to the institutions, while the institutions on the other side were quite lazy to change their structures. These were invitations without really resulting consequences. And the question might be, in how far can you work with the structure or change the structure? And also if it comes to the level of the collection, because in a way for a museum, the collection is something like a backbone. So if you give works into a collection, are you writing certificates where it's clearly defined when, how, under which conditions the work can be restaged or presented? Or do you try to keep any form of control? Or in the recent years, you also had attempts to change the economical structure of a collection. Some artists are not selling their work anymore, but they are renting them out to react to economic realities around us in a certain way. So how do you see your work in the collection, and what does it structurally there?
Well, the first installation I ever sold was to Udo Kittelmann. I was at the Documenta, Oquis Documenta, and he came, he saw it, and he said, "Can you come here?" I said, yeah. I'm the director of MMK. I'm like, yeah, I know who you are because we met a few years before. And he's like, well, I want to buy your work. And I was like, what? What are you buying? So he actually acquired that piece for MMK. And I had no idea. Like, it was the opposite. The institution challenged me, to think how to keep my work. Because as a performance artist, I don't think about that too much. So after that, I took it super seriously and I went the other way. So basically, the horses, how people call it the horses, but it's Tattling Whisper, was acquired by the Tate almost immediately. It was very bizarre. Like, they saw the piece, everybody loved it. They said, want to buy it, they bought it. And actually, I wrote a very long document that explained what are the conditions that need to happen outside, in reality, in the real world, in order to put the piece. So it's not that anytime they want to see horses in the gallery, they bring the piece. They have to actually make sure that the emotional condition of the people that are going to come to a museum are in a specific one. Almost as if you say you need certain temperature for a painting, right? But with the people. So it was very interesting because last time that I was there, I met again the people from the collection, and they were asking me questions like, what if horses disappear? So we have to go into this very intense, imaginative process of what if, anything that you can come up with, and I say, yeah, definitely I don't want robot horses. So maybe the piece will never be done again, But I think it's important to, in my case, to have these conditions, like right now, as I say, for example, right now there is a lot of artists in Cuba who are in prison, and there are more than 700 Cubans who are in prison for saying they want to be free in the streets. And this is one specific moment where everybody in the world knows what is happening, and then your work would be received differently than if people have no idea where is Cuba, They often say in South America or South Africa, so I'm like, yeah. So I think this is part of, I also feel like you need to prepare the audience to have a certain experience. It's not just this generic thing, I'm taking some water. No. You have to prepare the audience emotionally before they actually enter the piece. Yeah.
Florian, you are giving, when it comes to your installations, very precise instructions how the piece can be reinstalled or handled. Is this right? Or?
Well, less and less. I mean, I think at some point you just have to accept that from the moment something is there, it's the erosion starts, and that's somehow also a liberating thing. But I mean, pragmatically, yes. I mean, I think the thing here is to kind of deliver authenticity in a way, and kind of like negotiate what is the character of a piece. Sometimes I learn something from there, or there is something interesting to be negotiated. But I think it's kind of it's fair to say that like it's okay, erosion, like conservation is fear, and I don't want to deal with that emotionally. Practically, yes.
From the other side, so like the ones who acquire, it's a very problematic situation because, for example, I think that your work, as well as, it's a risky stance I'm getting on, as well as the revolutionary piano by Joseph Beuys, there are relicts then remaining, and there is one risk that they turn into relics, so that they're sitting there in the vitrine and playing the big admirable object. Or I have a documentation, and maybe the whole context in both variants is lost. And the way to, you spoke about getting the audience close or prepare the audience, is pretty complicated. Maybe this is one reason why we do all this work in the collection. We always think about how could we, well, this is maybe a backtone or something which then artists also feel. to think about a reactivation or reactualization of something which was a contemporary thing once, and which is, of course, historical now, and which is, of course, far. And you can't show a Fluxus game and start playing. At least in my view, Fluxus is more important in other concerns than just starting to play a game on a table, even if this is nice to do. But we have such a complication since several decades to conserve what is most important in art, and that is most times as an installation, a situation of something in a space, or it's even a gesture, an action, which is then gone. And I think it's pretty tricky to deal with that.
It is very tricky, and you will never have the right answer, neither way. But the way I see it in my case, I have to wait to do it either what you propose, which is just keep it as a reference, an index of what happened once, and we have to surround that with certain context. Or you can redo the work, actualizing it in order not to have the same image being produced, but to have the same experience or similar experience being produced. Let's say you do an artwork that creates fear in the audience, and you want that fear because after that you want them to realize this and this and this. So instead of doing something that they already are ready for it. For example, in the Tattling Whisper, my name was not anywhere, nowhere it was announced it was an art piece. So people were like, what's going on? And this kind of experience of what's happening, is there a bomb in the building? So I think maybe a few years from now, people are used to that, and that doesn't have the same effect. So I always see there are two ways to redo the work or activate the work. One is historically as a reference, and the other one is as an experience. And what you save is not how it looks, but what you feel with it. And that can be very different. Yeah. You know what? Maybe the game is something else, is digital, the game or something. You know what I mean?
Great. It's also a score in a way.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, of course.
I mean, I totally agree with this. Like, while you talk about like fluxes, which is extremely important to preserve, because like right now we have this very rigid mediality, actually. But I was just thinking about like a case study that I've seen two replicas of the Dresden Raum of Lisitsky, and I was exhibiting in one, and that was extremely interesting to see, you know, how they deal with it, all the respiratory questions, and kind of like how to bring this space back. And then I saw when I saw the second version in Dresden, which both of them were pristine and wonderfully done also. And when I saw the second version of it, I thought, no, I'm getting so much more of these old photographs. Yeah, like the imaginary, and maybe that's the presence of this piece. Yeah, like this is so much better as a fiction.
That sounds good. Yes, I get signs that time passes. One last chance, last call for questions now. Is there something pressing? Otherwise, thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for your contributions, and we will hand over the mic now to the next speaker.
Just very, very briefly, two last sentences. I really want to thank all of you. That was really a great and so rich afternoon. And I think I speak also in the name of Gottfried Thomann, and Theresia Niedermüller will speak on her own. I just wanted to say what makes me happy about all of your contributions, that I have learned about the infrastructural conditions of the future, where we have to go to, what we have to learn, and what we take with us in our discussions, especially also for the Austrian Ludwig Foundation. Thank you so much.
have to say I'm truly happy that we were able to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Austrian Ludwig Foundation yesterday and today with interesting keynotes and such an inspiring afternoon today. Really, it was wonderful. I want to express my gratitude to all the panelists, to Ana Gonçalves, Marit Kupka, Christian Cravagna, Luisa Saya, Florian Pumho, Susanne Titz, Tania Bruguera, Matthias Michalka, and Sabet Buchmann. Please give a round of applause to all of them. I would just like to add that this afternoon spoke to me on 3 levels, if you want to say so. To me personal, as a visitor to museums and the person who is interested in the arts. And secondly, I'm working in the public administration in the section for arts and culture, and we are discussing quite similar issues at the moment: collaboration, diversity. We, in the organization and also in the organizations we are responsible for example, the Bundesmuseum. And third, me being the chairwoman at the moment for the board of trustees of the Austrian Ludwig Foundation, we will definitely take a lot of ideas and topics back to our next meeting, and we will discuss what we can do more than, which is also written in our legal foundations, what will be the next step we're going to take, and discuss this strategically in the board of trustees. And we also had already a little conversation in the break we had before. And I lastly want to express my gratitude also to Rainer Fuchs, who gave us a short view through the Enjoy exhibition, and which showed us so brilliantly how strong the collaboration between the Austrian Ludwig Foundation and the Mumok is. Really a truly wonderful exhibition. Congratulations. And last but not least, I want to thank Sophia Rovetter and Bettina Brunner for organizing this symposium under those challenging conditions. Thank you very much. It went really, truly smooth. It was exceptionally. Thank you. So I wish all of you who will have to travel, safe travels back. Stay safe and stay optimistic. Thank you very much.